afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's virtual roundtable on immigration policy changes and their impact on Maryland employers. I'm Mary Kane, President and CEO of the Maryland Chamber of Commerce, and I'm so glad to see so many of you joining us for this very timely and important discussion. We deeply appreciate our partnership with Senator Will Smith, who is chair of the Senate Judiciary Proceedings Committee, and the Governor's Office, and their collaboration to offer this critical webinar. The changing landscape of immigration policy affects many Maryland businesses, and they are here to help provide clarity and practical guidance. And today, we're honored to be joined by an exceptional panel of experts. First, of course, Senator Will Smith, chair of the Judicial Proceedings Committee, and he also represents Montgomery County. We have Special Secretary Maria Martinez from the Governor's Office of Small, Minority, and Women Business Affairs. We have Kelly Dunning, partner at Berry, Appleman, and Leiden, and Kamal Essahab, who is the Senior Advisor and Director of Immigrant Affairs at the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives. A few quick reminders before we begin. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit any questions throughout the entire presentation. Senator Smith and Secretary Martinez will kick things off with a few remarks, and then Kamal and Kelly will engage in an interview format conversation for approximately half of the webinar. Afterwards, we'll open it up for questions, and the panelists will address as many questions as possible during the dedicated Q&A portion. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be shared with all registered participants later this week. And without further delay, I'd like to turn things over to Senator Will Smith to begin our discussion. Senator Smith, the floor is yours.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Excellent. Well, it was great to be here with you all. First, I just want to say thank you for your partnership in the legislature. You know, we're in the midst of our 90-day legislative session, and we are a citizen legislature, which means that your presence and your expertise is in high demand when we consider legislation that impacts the business climate and community in Maryland. So I just want to say, first, Mary, thank you so much for your partnership and your presence in Annapolis. I also want to give a special shout out to Grayson Wiggins, who's done a fantastic job connecting you all with legislators. You all are well represented in Annapolis. I also want to, before we jump into some things, I want to just give another shout out for gratitude for the work you all did at our job fair this summer. You all hosted this job fair at United Therapeutics in my district. You brought together 27 employers from a variety of industries. We had 410 job seekers, 119 walk-ins, and we had Afghan refugees. We're going to talk a little bit more about what their status is as well. We had 30 Afghan refugees who got connected with services and job opportunities, and we're still running that down. So I just want to say thank you for that. That was just a great partnership, and you all rendered a great service for my district. So thank you for that. I'll set this. I know we're talking about immigration and some of the new policies coming down and how we're interacting and reacting in Annapolis. Our session was always going to be and continues to be dictated by two big things. One was our $3 billion structural shortfall. So we had, that's always top of mind, and we're considering the budget now. And then two was we had a new administration come into Washington that drastically changed the policy climate and the direction of our country, and immigration was top of mind for that. And just to set the stage for Maryland and the United States, there are roughly 45 million immigrants in the United States, about 14% of our population. And I used to work at the Department of Homeland Security before I joined my law firm that I'm at now. And some of the best moments I've ever had were watching a kind of a swearing-in ceremony where people get they have worked extremely hard. They've earned their citizenship, and to see someone get sworn in to become an American by choice is just a beautiful thing. And it's really emotional. So if you ever have an opportunity to do that, I would highly encourage you to do so. But to get to that point, not only did it have to come from far lands, both lands far and near, but they also had to take a test, a citizenship test. And it's funny when you think about it. There are about 100 questions, and I think you have 10 of which you have to actually to do on this test. But the passage rate is like 91% on the first time. And so there was an experiment that was done in the United States with about 3,000 participants, native-born Americans, to take that same citizenship test. And only a majority of people passed in one state, Vermont. So it shows you we got to get back to civics and our public schools, but it just shows you that immigrants step up, learn culture, learn history, integrate, bring their expertise and their talent, and it's a tremendously I think moving and an essential thing, lifeblood for our communities, not only just the business community, but for our community in Maryland and the United States at large. So, and obviously that picture is juxtaposed with, you've got about 11 million undocumented folks in the United States, and folks that have come here seeking asylum, folks who have come here, just without permission. You've got a whole variety of folks that have come in. And so you've got 11 million people here, and you saw that the Secretary of Defense has issued more troops to the border. And you've got a policy of plussing up border security. I think every level-headed person says, look, every nation should have sovereign borders just for national security purposes. That's a front-end solution. You also have the back-end solution of reforming and fixing our immigration system so that it's more fluid, so that it's more flexible, and so that folks that are coming here seeking asylum have an opportunity to contribute meaningfully as well. And for the 11 million people that are here undocumented, obviously it is infeasible to extricate those folks for a variety of reasons. Logistically, it's impossible, but also a lot of folks have been here for years, decades, contributing meaningfully, have family here. And so I think that's something that we'll have to just continue to think about as we move forward in the next couple of years. In Maryland, to set the scene for Maryland, immigrants play a critical role in the economy. They contribute as workers, entrepreneurs, consumers, and taxpayers. And they contribute and strengthen communities in a wide range of fields, from biotech to healthcare, education, seafood processing, all of the like. And many immigrants take on some of the most demanding and dangerous jobs in Maryland. And we saw that when the Francis Scott Key Bridge fell. All 6 of those road construction workers lost their lives. They were immigrants from Latin America. And I think that just kind of encapsulates and shows us how important immigrants are to our economy. Some quick facts, I'm sure the Secretary will go over this, but immigrants have long bolstered our population. As Maryland's population is shrinking, as you all are fairly aware, we face a number of challenges: economic, housing, workforce shortages, and the like. But as of 2022, immigrants represented about 16% of the population. And as of 2023, which is the latest data that was available, I think, on the Comptroller's website, 21% of Maryland's labor force is immigrant labor force. So it's an essential lifeline for our economy. They make up over 50% of the workforce in several occupations like health aides, taxi drivers, housekeepers, carpenters, and the like. And they also pay taxes. And there are more than 100,000 ITIN filers in Maryland. They pay more than $100 million in personal income taxes. So immigrants really do play a critical role in our economy and in your businesses. But some of those policy changes at the national level are going to impact us. And that's everything from, visa appointments, issuances of visas, all types of visas, increased requests for evidence and denials from some Citizenship and Immigration Services and Customs and Border Protection. So all those things are going to complicate people getting legal citizenship, but then also transitioning into the workforce. And so in Maryland, there are a lot of policies floating around, 3 of which really address securing folks that are here, regardless of what their status is, to protect their information, to make sure that everyone is advised of their rights as people who are present in the United States, and then also ensuring that they have their supports if and when folks or families are separated through what's happening now in Maryland. So I know I've gone over a little bit over my time here. I'll just say thank you for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to the discussion ahead.
Hello. Good afternoon, and thank you so much, Senator Smith, for the words, for really sharing and framing this important discussion. I want to thank Mary Kane and her team at the Maryland Chamber of Commerce for creating the space. This is such a challenging and complex topic in any case, right? So adding the layers now certainly makes it a little more intertwined. So hopefully with this discussion, we'll be able to offer some insight. So grateful for Kamal Saib's appointment to the office. He's just been extremely helpful and insightful and just knowledgeable in looking at this in different perspectives and bringing information to us when it comes to policies as well. So this has been truly a critical point in time that the administration having that kind of support and experience is critical. With that said, I'm Maria Martinez, and I have the honor of serving as the governor's appointed special secretary at the Governor's Office of Small Minority and Women Business Affairs, or GOSBA, as we like to call it. In this role, the team and I work to ensure that small minority, veteran-owned, and women businesses have access to the tools, resources, and opportunities they need to thrive in Maryland's economy. When we talk about Maryland's economy, we must talk about immigrants, not as a separate group, but as an integral part of the workforce, our entrepreneurial community, and the very fabric of our state. Senator Smith did already touch on very key points as in reference to Maryland's population of immigrant population of 17%, coming from areas of El Salvador, India, China, Nigeria, and Guatemala. Right now, the international immigration is driving Maryland's population growth. Like many of our neighboring states, we are experiencing a slowdown in natural population growth due to declining birth rates. But thanks to immigration, Maryland is maintaining a stable and growing workforce. Across the industries, immigrants are not just filling jobs, they're also creating them. As Senator Smith had mentioned, more than 1 in 5 workers in Maryland is foreign-born, and they play a pivotal role in key industries. We have 23% of STEM workers and 23% of registered nurses in Maryland are immigrants, and they're strengthening our innovation sectors and our healthcare sectors. Over 25% of Maryland's Main Street businesses are immigrant owned, and these businesses not only serve our communities but also generate jobs and strengthen local economies. As the senator stated, they contribute billions in tax revenue and boost consumer spending, making Maryland more competitive in a globalized economy. At the same token, as the senator mentioned, they have work that is physically demanding and high-risk fields, as well, as we saw tragically exemplified by the Key Bridge collapse. Their labor sustains Maryland's infrastructure, construction, and transportation sectors, reinforcing how essential they are to our state's resilience and future. Across industries from healthcare to construction, agriculture, and technology, immigrants are not just workers, they are innovators, investors, and job creators. Under Governor Moore's leadership and with our steadfast advocacy, Maryland continues to be a place where immigrants can contribute fully to our shared prosperity. We know that federal immigration policies create uncertainty, but Maryland remains focused on supporting our businesses and workforce so they can navigate these shifts while continuing to grow and innovate. Immigrants are not just part of Maryland's economy. They are essential to its future. They are our neighbors, our entrepreneurs, and the backbone of key industries. Without them, we would not have the workforce innovation or economic strength that keeps Maryland moving forward. And today's discussion will provide critical insights for business leaders, whether you're an entrepreneur, an employer navigating workforce challenges, or someone invested in Maryland's long-term prosperity. Thank you again for inviting us to be part of this conversation. And we are very excited to partner with you and to bring information and also to learn from the challenges that are being faced. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Martinez, for that context. Thank you, Senator Smith, for your leadership on this issue in the General Assembly. And thank you, Mary Kane, for hosting us today. I want to bring into the conversation Kelly Dunning, who is a partner at Barry Appleman, which is one of the preeminent immigration, full-service immigration law firms, and also who happens to be an expert in all facets of business immigration, compliance and audits, but also on the visa, employment-based visas as well. So Kelly, I know we've folks on this call have seen and heard a lot about immigration policies coming out of Washington over the past 40 days. What are the particular policies that you think employers should be paying attention to at this time?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm really happy to be here this morning. Thank you all so much for inviting me to speak with you all. I think everything that's being said this morning so far, or I guess sorry, I'm on the West Coast, so morning, almost afternoon for all of you on the East Coast. It is immigration compliance. I mean, really at the crux of it, and we're looking at immigration compliance being the really center point of this administration so far in these first 40 some days. And what I mean by that is exactly what Senator Smith has already alluded to as well, is on the one hand, you have essentially, we're going to see policies, and we've already seen policies that are making sure that people who are here in a legal status. And so if you're not, or if they are not here in a legal status, then this administration is taking actions to either have these folks removed from the United States or open up pathways by which they can, what we are calling self-deport. So the big policies, I think, are the big things that you've all been seeing in the news, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in detail, are the Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents going out and arresting people who they believe to be here under criminal activity, or maybe of a person of interest, right? So they've been going out, they've been doing what we're calling these raids. And so all of this is part of that, making sure that folks that are here in the United States are following the rules and not committing crimes. So that's that first kind of aspect of what this administration is doing. Then last week, what we saw is this new program called, we're calling it a registration of sorts. And this is going to be a requirement that if you have not been fingerprinted, or you are not here in any legal status, we're still waiting for the guidelines. But what it's going to require is that you register with the federal government to let them know that essentially you are here. And again, we're still waiting on all the details. And so, of course, as soon as we get all of those details, we will certainly be reporting and letting you all know what those requirements will be. But again, for those folks that are here, and as we've been saying, some of these folks have been here for years, for decades. But if they have not ever been here in the United States under any lawful status, then they will be required to sort of come forth, let the government know that they're here, and then there will be some sort of determination as to what will happen. Again, our belief is this administration most likely will be asking these folks to leave the country with the understanding that they could return legally. But again, that gets to this next point of how do people come here in a legal status? So on the one hand, from a compliance standpoint, there's this push to ensure that if you're here and you're here working under a legal status. If you're not, then this administration is going to take actions to make sure that you leave the country until you can come back legally. So that's on the one hand. On the second hand, if you are here legally under some sort of a humanitarian parole program or some sort of legal working status or family-based status, as we've been talking about this morning, it's going to get more and more difficult to maintain that status. And what we mean by that is we anticipate a lot of policies coming from this administration to make it, more difficult to stay or to continue to maintain these working statuses. As Senator Smith had alluded to, we anticipate just by the workforce reduction policy or executive order that the president issued within the first week of his administration, that decrease in the amount of people that will be adjudicating the applications that are being submitted to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services is going to have a significant impact on their ability to keep up with the work. So what we saw in President Trump's first administration was a significant slowdown of the agency's ability to keep up with those applications. And what that meant then was that people were not getting their work authorization documents in a timely manner. And so there was lots of gaps in their ability, or your employees may have gaps in their ability to continue to work. Because they're still waiting for their employment authorization document, or they're still waiting for their adjustment of status application, or their asylum case that's pending. Whatever the avenue it is that they're here on a legal basis, they're waiting for those documents to get processed. And so again, it may end up being where you may need to put those folks on an unpaid leave. It may lead to possible termination of their position with you. And so again, just really, as you as an employer, making it more difficult to keep these folks on your payroll while all of these things are happening. And then those that are on those work visas where they have to travel to a consulate to pick up the paperwork and then come back to the United States. Again, we've most recently seen the first policy from the Department of State where what we're calling the interview waiver. Under previous administrations, there was a process by which you do not need to have an interview before a consular officer. If you had a certain visas that expired during a certain amount of time, most notably 48 months, if you were on a visa and you were within that 48-month time frame, you were eligible to go to that consulate and apply to get that new or renewed visa through this interview waiver process, meaning you didn't have to wait for an appointment. You didn't have to wait in line to get a consular officer to review your renewal application to come back to the United States. So it was a very efficient process. That process a week and a half ago got pulled back. And so again, even at the Department of State U.S. consulates, we are starting to see where that time frame now is been crunched. So they've now moved it to, it has to be the same visa type that you were on, and it's only if it's expired in the last 12 months. So again, if you are not fitting within that window, you're going to need to get an appointment. You're going to need to go see a consular officer for that appointment and that interview before they get you the paperwork to come back to the United States. And again, all of that, Kamal, is slow down, right? So it just takes more time. That means Department of State has to have more people to do these interviews. And we know that they also are subject to the president's executive order with decreasing the federal workforce. So we also know that there's going to be less consular officers to do that level of work. So all of that, I know that's a lot to be said. So with all of that being said I think employers in the state of Maryland can really expect these slowdowns because of staffing issues, because of these policy changes being either taken away or reduced in time frames. And really what it does is it just is going to cause a lot of angst and inability of people to continue to work on a more regular basis.
Thank you, Kelly. Let's zoom in within that on enforcement at the worksite. And there've been a couple of worksite enforcement actions that have been in the media, here in recent weeks. In that context, what are some rights and obligations, legal rights, legal obligations that an employer should be conscious of with respect to enforcement at the worksite?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, definitely. So I could talk all day about this issue. So, so I will shorten it up to the most really important areas that you all should be aware of. So specifically with the Immigration Customs Enforcement worksite enforcement, you're going to want to make sure that within your businesses, you understand what are your public spaces and what are your non-public spaces. And then making sure that you have protocols in place so that in those public spaces where an immigration and customs enforcement officer would be able to come into, um, is everybody who's there, whether it's your security folks, whether it's your front desk personnel, whether it's a supervisor who is supervising or overseeing, a manager that's overseeing that work site, making sure that they are aware and have some sort of protocol in place so that they know what to do when that immigration officer walks in that front door or comes into that public space. Making sure that that person understands how to look at a warrant. And I'll talk about there's two different warrants that that an immigration officer will be carrying. And knowing what to do when they come in, and then knowing who to call. Because again, you may not want that front desk person, that security person, or that manager to be the one that's dealing with that immigration officer. You want somebody who's going to be able to look at things and be able to assess the situation with that officer. So I would say first thing, it is scary. I understand, hearing everything that's been happening in the news. If this happens to one of your work sites, it's a very scary situation, right? But I think really making sure that everybody remains calm and do not resist. If you don't remember anything else, just remember those two things. Stay calm and don't resist, right? It's not worth getting into any problems or having any injuries, because an ICE officer does show up at your front door. So, but stay calm, don't resist, and then making sure you've got that protocol tree. Making sure whether it's your legal counsel or somebody in your immigration division, or you don't have any of that, somebody in your company who can work with that immigration officer or get on the phone and talk to that immigration officer when they do show up. So that's the first things, is having those protocols in place and everybody ready and prepared for when those officers appear. And then when those officers appear, they will have two different types of warrants. There's an administrative warrant, and that warrant is issued by the Department of Homeland Security. And so that, if you see, that warrant will have Department of Homeland Security written on the top, and it will also be signed by usually a special agent in charge or a supervisory special agent. And if you see that warrant, and that warrant could be, mostly it's being issued because they are looking for somebody. So they may be looking for someone or a group of people that they believe that are working at your work site, or they might be looking for documents if they believe that you're a company that is doing something improperly, or that warrant could ask for both, right? They may want documents and computers and laptops, or they may want to see employees as well. That administrative warrant, however, is not issued by a court of law, and therefore you do have the authority to push back. So when that immigration officer walks into your front door, if that's the type of warrant that they issue, you as an employer do not have to tell that officer anything. You don't have to let them into your non-public spaces. You also do not have to tell them where any of your employees are. You don't have to walk them into any, non-public space to provide them with access to any of your employees. And you do not have to answer any of their questions. So that's the first type of warrant. The second type of warrant is that judicial warrant. And that's where the immigration officer would have needed to go to either a state court or a federal district court. Most likely it's going to be a federal district court, since immigration is generally handled on the federal level. But we do know that they are signing agreements with state level law enforcement. And so it's very possible throughout the evolution of this, you may start seeing these judicial warrants being issued by a state court as well. And that's a warrant where it is enforceable by the immigration officer. So it will say the district court names on the top, and it'll be signed by a judge on the bottom. And if you see one of those, that is then where you will need to cooperate, right? So you will need to let them get access to the areas that are specifically listed on the warrant. So again, this is where it's really important to ensure that you have that protocol in place so people are prepared and ready. And then being able to look through that warrant, um, and making sure that that officer is able to go and do what they need to do under the warrant's requirements. Now, with that being said, it does not mean that you have to consent to the search. And that's where we've been telling folks is you should still not consent to the search and be vocal about the fact that you do not consent to the search. Because what that will do is preserve your ability to push back where that officer may have gone outside the bounds of that judicial warrant. So again, you're going to really want to make sure that you let them in, let them do what they need to do, but don't consent to the search. And then that way you're going to then want to document everything that they're doing, making sure you're documenting who they're talking to, which employees, and of course, document who or what they are taking if they take anything. And if they do take any of your equipment or documents that are on site at that office, they are also required to give you an inventory list. So I know that's a lot. Let me just add one more thing from the employee's perspective. So as the employer, if it is that judicial warrant, yes, you do need to then let them into those spaces to go talk to those employees if the employees are part of the consent to search. Just because you have to let them go into see those employees and talk to them does not mean that your employees have to answer any of their questions. So again, I know the ACLU has been handing out a lot of these pointers called the red card. And we've been encouraging, you as an employer are not obligated to assist that employee, but you certainly can give them resources if you choose to do so. And that red card is one thing that basically lets that employee knows what their rights are. And their rights would be, they do not have to answer any of the questions while they're there on site. They can ask for an attorney, and they don't have to give the immigration officer their status. So, so they'll eventually need to talk to that officer, but they don't have to do it outside of having an attorney if they have one or if they would like to have one. So again, I know that was a lot of information, Kamal. So hopefully that gives everybody sort of a bit of an insight in where they need to start and what they can do to help their employees.
Thank you, Kelly. Let me ask you one more question and then we'll open it up to Q&A. One strand of policies we've seen come from this administration have been, taking away status from people who have it, whether it's Venezuelans under TPS or Haitians under TPS or folks in a parole status. What are some considerations that employers should keep in mind as they're hearing about folks who have these statuses that no longer will in the future based on these policies?
Yes, agreed. Yeah, that's a really great question. And yes, so this is one of those areas again where, immigration compliance is going to be really important in understanding what this administration is doing. We knew from the start that they were not a big fans of the temporary protected status. So what you've been talking about, there's several countries throughout some of them have been on the temporary protected status list for quite some time. Some are newer than others. But we do know that it is this administration's intentions to review each of those countries to determine whether or not they believe that those temporary statuses or that temporary protection of those citizens that are here in the United States are still needed. And so there's a process by which they have to go through and determine whether or not it is safe for that person to go back to their home country. A lot of times the temporary protected status is initiated because of some sort of natural disaster or war or something going on in that person's home country that prohibits them from going back to that home country safely. And so they're reevaluating those countries. So as you stated, they're looking at Honduras, Nicaragua, Haiti, Cuba. All of these countries have expiration dates that are coming up in the next year. And so we do see Venezuela and Haiti have been the first two that we have seen with expirations that the administration has reviewed, and they have determined in their belief that there is no issue with their with these foreign nationals from those countries going back and being safe in those countries. And so what they're doing is they're ending those programs. We would anticipate that they would also end them for the other ones, the other countries that are upcoming. So like Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, Ukraine. All of those are ones that are going to have expirations this year, and we would anticipate that they would try to end them. And what that means then is once your employee who may be working on that status, right now we're seeing they're being allowed to stay through the end of that program and through the end of that work authorization. But once that program ends and their work authorization ends, there is no continuation of that program. And so that employee is going to need to figure out if they can move to another status. And I saw somewhere in the chat, well, why can't they just come here in a legal status? It's very, very difficult. I think that's one thing a lot of people don't understand about the US's immigration process is it's very, very difficult. There's very limited options for people who want to come to the United States on a work visa. Family-based is really been where the US immigration has been focused for most of its history. And so unless you have a family member who can sponsor you, there's not many other options for you to come to the United States legally and work here legally. And so, other than that, you may need to go and get, as you were talking about, some other form of status, which we see a lot of folks from these countries apply for asylum. But again, the asylum process is not easy. It takes a long time. And you have to show that you were persecuted on account of a particular, there's various different categories that you have to show that you were persecuted on. And so some of these folks may not fit within those qualifications. We're also seeing the same on parole, as you talked about, Kamal. There's been lots of parole programs and sponsorship programs that the Biden administration opened up so that people could come here on these legal pathways. And the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services last week indicated that they are affirmatively holding those parole applications that are currently pending. And we have heard that they do plan to end at least the parole programs for the Cuba, for Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. So we know for sure they're going to be ending those programs. We haven't quite seen the announcement on that. We're still waiting, but we do know that they are planning to end those programs. We believe they plan to end the Uniting for Ukraine. The big question is we have not seen anything on Afghanistan yet. We do not know if they're going to end the parole program for Afghanistan, but we have seen and heard, and I don't know if many of you in the audience have seen and heard from your employees that are here from Afghanistan on these parole programs, that their applications have not been moving forward in terms of USCIS adjudicating the renewals of their paroles. So we're waiting to hear how USCIS and this administration will be handling the Afghan parole program. We do not know yet, but for many of the others, we do know they plan to end them. And then again, we don't think that there will be any path laid out for them. So again, the only option could be applying for asylum.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Let me squeeze in one quick question here. Maybe you can give us a quick response. We've talked a lot about administrative changes. Is there any prospect for legislative reform?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And every year we ask that question. all the administrations. I've been in in this business now for 25 years, and it's been on top of mind. We all know that this system doesn't necessarily work the way we need it to, right? Um, we're always really hopeful of comprehensive immigration reform. I don't think I'm not optimistic we're going to see that in these first 2 years of this administration. I think maybe after midterms, depending upon how that works out, maybe we could see some sort of comprehensive immigration reform come forward. But I don't think we'll see anything, unfortunately, within this first year. I'm not sure if we would see anything in the second year other than potentially, there could be a border bill that there's lots of them that have already been submitted for review and for discussion, but I don't know that we'd see any of them come out onto the floor of either of the chambers. And certainly, I don't know that we'd see anything this year. But I think the big one would be a border bill that would then have some of these other comprehensive legal pathways attached to it, and that would then determine whether or not both parties could come together and find a compromise of a strong border enforcement along with some of these legal programs and opening up the doors for them. That's what we're all hoping for, but I don't think we're going to see that in this first year.
Great, thank you. I'm going to hand it off now to Grayson, who will facilitate the Q&A.
Thanks, Kamal. Thanks, Kelly, for all that information. It's super helpful. We do have some questions in the chat. Just want to run through some of these. The first one I'm going to ask Chairman Smith. So one of our attendees asked, they note that the president recently signed an executive order making English the official language of the country. Do you foresee that impacting Maryland's language access policies? And will official correspondence in Maryland still be provided in languages other than English?
Well, thanks, Grayson. And Kelly, that was awesome, like an encyclopedic rendition. So that was really great. Thank you for that. Look, Grayson, I think I liken that more like it's symbolic more than anything else, almost like the Gulf of Mexico renaming for us, because in Maryland, obviously we have an administration that's sensitive to these needs, and the departments are also sensitive in disseminating their information to access services in multiple different languages. So we've got that commitment from a great administration, but we also have a number of areas in statute that require the dissemination of certain information in multiple languages. And I think of like your ballot, for instance, that's something that, is in our statute and in our policy. So as we move forward, I don't think that that's going to actually impact our operations here in Maryland. Now, if other states choose a different route in terms of how they want to disseminate and distribute their information, that's obviously under their purview. But here in Maryland, I don't see that having a significant impact at all. Much just basically symbolic, like the Gulf of Mexico renaming. I mean, it's just kind of farcical, really.
So people should be reassured that information will still be communicated out from Maryland.
That's the bottom line upfront analysis. Yes.
Okay. And I think one of the really important reasons that you were able to join us today is, and for those that don't know, Chair Smith and his committee do a great job on judicial issues. And one of the questions we have in the chat is, and this is in response, I think, to some of the things that Kelly was saying, but what constitutes a public versus a non-public space for searches?
Kelly hit the nail on the head. I mean, she did give you great kind of background on that, the delineation between private and public spaces and the difference between a judicial warrant and an administrative warrant. An administrative warrant issued by a bureaucrat within DJS, within the department, within DHS. And so whereas like a judicial warrant is by a U.S. district court judge or state court judge, as she mentioned. So it's got the force of law, and that's the only warrant that will allow you to go into a private space. And so if you, as an employer, need to understand the differences between those spaces and understand whatever you're reading from that ICE agent, the difference between an administrative warrant and the judicial warrant. The judicial warrant, again, is the only warrant that's going to allow you to get into that private space. And I will say that prospect is not far-fetched here in Maryland. I've met with the head of ICE in Maryland, and as they've broadened their aperture. They're going to go for, the folks with criminal records and backgrounds first, and then broadening out the aperture. But there are also things called collateral people that they're picking up. So people that may be living or working alongside someone that's a target. And they will absolutely go ahead and collect those people. And so I think it's just important as an employer to understand public-private space, difference between administrative warrant, judicial warrant, but also what your rights are. A lot of that guidance in Maryland can be found on the Office of the Attorney General's website. I'll drop the link into the page. They've developed some really great guidance. The governor has also done so as well. But I'll drop the link in so that you all can have that guidance and background and understanding that you should probably have, as Kelly said, someone well-versed in interfacing and just being prepared to interface with someone, because it's a traumatic kind of experience. So an official shows up with a warrant. And if you don't know the difference between the two and you don't know your rights, you can end up, taking some actions that you may not have wanted to. So I'll drop the link into the chat with the Office of the Attorney General. They've got some really great resources there to help you understand your rights.
Awesome, thank you. And this next question's I think probably best for Kelly, and it's a broad question, but give us your best shot.
Okay.
So one of our attendees asked what the potential impact on TN visas would be, and this was not a part of the question, but I did see in the chat that we have a number of businesses here from the Eastern Shore who I believe utilize the J1 visa on a regular basis. So you could just talk about any potential impacts on those two visas.
Yeah, great questions. So the TN visa, so far it's moving along, but we have seen, some questions about how strict there's going to start being, right? So I think this was one of the other things that was mentioned earlier in the conversation about seeing more RFEs, seeing more denials. And so RFEs stand for request for evidence. So really scrutinizing the TN visa is what we've started seeing in the last couple of weeks, whether you're coming through the border or whether you're applying in country with USCIS. We're just seeing a lot more scrutiny. And of course, with tariffs, we've all are hearing about the tariff discussions, and it's possible that, the TN visa could be changed if they look at the USMCA agreement again, or if tariffs are put into place, or if Canada and Mexico don't allow tariffs to be put into place. It's something where potentially this administration could say, well, that's fine, then we're not going to issue any visas if Canada and Mexico don't allow us to move forward with tariffs. So we're seeing this administration kind of throw visas as part of that negotiating tactic. So for now, the TN visa is there, it's available, you can use it, but we are seeing more scrutiny. And we are watching to see whether or not just visa issuance in general starts getting thrown into these tariff arguments. And then in terms of the J visas, that's a great question, because even under the first administration, we did see the program shut down because of COVID, but we didn't see it shut down or anything change in the program with the first Trump administration. So we've not heard of anything or any potential policy changes that this administration plans to take with the J visa. So as long as that employee is eligible for it and they're able to obtain it, then we're not seeing any downstream effects on the J visa, except for their ability to get the visa timely. So if it, obviously they have to pick that up at one of the consulates. And that's where, again, getting that appointment to go see a consular officer to get the J visa could be, that's where I think we're going to see some potential issues, whether they're going to be able to get it in time for that internship or in time for the training that they need to be here in the United States for. So I think that's where we're going to see a lot of issues in that J program. So that's a great question. And real quickly, if I could jump into, there was one, I think that kind of circles onto this, is well, if I've applied for the if I've applied for the work authorization and there's these extensions, right? These automatic extensions, would I still be okay? And yes, those there's certain categories that when you apply to renew your employment authorization, that there's these automatic extensions. The most notable one is the 540-day extension, or if you're a STEM person, there's a 180-day STEM extension if you're a student going to a STEM student work situation. So those are there in place. And the good thing about it was most in the past, those extensions were based on policy, not regulation. And prior to the Biden administration going out, they did make that a regulatory requirement. So for now, those extensions are still there, and they will still allow your employees to utilize them if they fall within those categories. However, we do know that this current administration was not happy with those extensions, and we may see them try to take away that automatic extension. But again, it would have to be done through notice and comment rulemaking, so it will take them time in order to do that. But for now, there are those extensions in place, and we hope that the slowdown in processing times will still fall within those extensions. But again, we could even see processing times get so lengthy that they could even fall outside of those 540-day requirements. So certainly more to come. So thanks for letting me address that real quickly.
Thanks, Kelly. And I think along that same line of questioning, and this is maybe for Kamal and Secretary Martinez, someone in the chat did ask, is the state of Maryland assisting employers, or are they providing guidance to employers about completing these applications for visas, or any information that's being shared?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that on. That is not something that, as I understand, we've historically done, or it's not something that currently we're planning to do. If I'm understanding the question correctly, filling out immigration paperwork for employers, is that right?
Or just like does the state have any kind of best practices on that, or any information that can get employers connected to federal information?
We do not at this point.
Okay. There's an interesting question. It seems we have a bank that's listening in, and they have noted that they work with non-U.S. companies to relocate to the U.S. But there has been some issues with, it appears that the Maryland program requires these non-U.S. companies who relocate here to open a U.S. banking account as part of the immigration process. However, a bank account cannot be opened for non-U.S. citizens unless they fit a list of requirements. And it appears that there may be some differences in the requirements for those bank accounts than there are the immigration requirements. So I don't know if anybody has any. That's a very specific question, I understand, but maybe something to look at in the future if we don't have any information now. All right. And then I think the general question I'm getting a lot in the chat is regarding where can people go for information? What are the best websites to access? Chairman Smith, I know, thank you for putting the resource guide from the Attorney General's office in the chat. But if any of our panelists have any additional information on best resources, that would be helpful to share. Kelly, if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I know, the National Immigrant Legal Rights Center, and NILRC, I always get the acronym incorrect, but they're great. They have a lot of really helpful resources for folks. The ACLU, I know, has been posting a lot of help guides, know your rights guides. Even the American Bar Association, they have an immigration committee rights. They've been posting a lot as well. So the resources are certainly there. I think it's just making sure that you're accessing well-known ones. So I would certainly, recommend those three locations in terms of whether it's an employee that's asking you questions and you want them to go to a reputable website, or whether you're just looking for some information. Of course, a lot of, I'll recommend, our law firm, we have a policy tracker that is public. And we've been posting, all of the executive orders and the impacts that it has on the business community as it relates to business immigration visas and certain, work authorization. So I know there's, a lot of the law firms and are posting publicly as well. So as an employer, that might be a good resource for you to go to as well.
Thanks, Kelly. And we're running out of time, and so normally I have the chime that goes off when I've testified for too long, but I don't have that on here. So I'm going to swing it back over to our CEO, Mary Kane, to close us out.
Wow, thank you, everyone. This information is incredible, Kelly. Senator Smith, of course, Special Secretary Martinez, Kelly Dunning, and Kamal Essahiv. Thank you so much. This is such great information to let us know how to deal with these very challenging times right now, being an employer and knowing all the rules. So it's been quite an eye-opener. And thank you for the places that we could possibly go to have this conversation and to get more information on this. And I really appreciate it. I'm the daughter of immigrants who my parents didn't have to go through such an elaborate system when they came here. So we just are looking forward to helping all of our members be able to navigate this. So thank you all to joining us for this important conversation on immigration. And it's a big impact on Maryland businesses. We appreciate our partnership with Senator Will Smith and the governor's office in making this discussion possible, and hope today's insights help you to navigate these evolving policies. We will send out a recording of this webinar to all registered participants later this week. And just want to say thank you again, and we look forward to continuing this conversation with you in the future. Take care.